Hello everyone, so I'm joined here today for the first time in person by Ashley. Welcome to the channel, Ashley, in person.
Hi everybody.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about facing fears, and there's a couple of notes that I actually want to mention about facing fears as far as how we're defining it right now. So, facing fears, a traumatic event where knowledge or senses were inhibited, where the result was in some way painful. That pain can be on an emotional, physical, or other level, even spiritual level. Events that replicate these circumstances will cause the fear of the same event happening to overwhelm the mind. So we get overwhelmed by the emotions when we think the same event is going to happen, when we have all these cues, whether it's, you're in a particular situation where somebody's walking directly behind you, and maybe you feel like it replicates an instance in your life where it felt, it was dark, you heard them walking very close to you, they perhaps had a hood over their head and they had their hands in their pockets, and perhaps the trauma kind of replicates itself in the current moment. You start fearing that's going to happen again. So the example that I want to use for facing fears is, so I have this fear of, as I said before, I have this fear of needles, and it's not even tattoo needles or piercing needles. It is particularly needles that are meant to give shots or vaccinations, things like that, or draw blood, especially draw blood. Now, when I was in pre-K and I was in daycare, there was this car wash right next to the daycare, and we were out in in the field that had this fence around it, and a drug needle basically rolled down to the edge of the fence, and then my friend picked it up when we were looking at it and stuff, and eventually he's like, "Here you go," and he thrust it towards me, and it stabbed me right in the palm. And then I was like, "Oh my god!" I just pull it out, and then we went and got a caretaker teacher. I'm not really sure how you call people that are in running a daycare, but after that is really where the trauma started even more. I had to get 10 different shots. I had to get all this blood drawn, and it was all in consecutive order. All these things happened one after the other. All these shots, all these blood draws, and the original me being stabbed in the hand. So even nowadays, as a result, when I see a needle that's either meant to draw out blood for me or to give me a vaccination, I feel that same old tenderness, that same old like an old scar, old wound in my mind that's being rubbed, and it's kind of bringing forth that same pain. When it happens, when I have to get my blood drawn, I feel like I'm that little kid. I'm that little kid again. I feel like I'm in the same situation, and even though all these years later I'm a developed person, I'm placed back into that little kid mindset. So that's my example for right now. Ashley, do you have an example for yourself after you read your own addition to talking about trauma?
Well, as far as that goes, I believe there's a physiological imprint that happens when we experience trauma. I have so many traumatic stories that I could tell that it's kind of hard to choose one. I basically developed complex post-traumatic stress disorder from so many traumatic events. So if we went back to the beginning, my first memory was my brother chasing me through the apartment and a vase breaking and him picking up a shard of the vase and cutting his stomach open in front of me and saying, "Do you want to know what pain looks like?" And so there's just countless memories.
Obviously he had his own trauma, correct? Where it caused him to do that?
I'm sure he had some trauma. But so that left it so I became sensitive to the world around me, and then I experienced so many different traumas that I eventually became an agoraphobe because I was scared of the world in general. So I had to rebuild myself to be able to even do things like leave my apartment, leave the house, even sleeping at night became almost impossible. So I think we have what happens on the physical, the emotional, and then on the spiritual level, we can actually have little holes cut into our auric field. So
yeah, so when as far as facing fears goes, I always try to go into the mindset when I'm going into the doctor to get a vaccination or blood drawn. I put myself in this mindset that it actually doesn't hurt that much. It's a very simple procedure. It has nothing to do with what you experienced before. So I run that around in my head, and it doesn't always help, but sometimes it does help. But even afterwards, when I feel no pain from it, I get the urge to like cradle my arm like there's like some severe pain because it's a mental pain.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about how to face your fears,
Yeah.
it's all about preparation. I think because sometimes when I do prepare my mind, it actually works. What do you do?
The preparation part, it's called. So you usually have a few tools that you use, like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you have an anchor thought. That's one tool that you can have. Also, the exposure therapy, eventually you'll get desensitized to the thing that you're afraid of. So if you're afraid of needles, it would be like maybe just being in the room with the needle to start out with, and like once you get to the point where you're no longer afraid of just even being in the room with it, and you're 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, anchor thought to say like, I don't know, do you feel comfortable like laying in bed with your pillow? That would be like an anchor thought. So something that brings you joy or happiness would be your anchor thought. And then you could pick up the needle, that would be the next thing. And eventually you get comfortable with all the different levels until, you have a doctor or somebody, administer a shot, and eventually you'd be completely desensitized. So, yeah.
I think subconsciously, why I started tattooing myself and actually, as far as using piercing needles, very fine ones for like blood magic, I think that a part of me still feared that kind of needle even, but I exposed myself to these needles kind of trying to show myself subconsciously that I'm not afraid of them anymore.
Yeah.
So how have you faced your fears in that way where you're preparing yourself for it?
Well, since I became so overly traumatized by everything, it's like the world forced me to do exposure therapy even by just getting up in the morning and staying alive. Like I would have to do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go into a safety thought, even just to be able to breathe, because I would have 10 to 15 panic attacks a day. Just being in my living room was a fearful thing for me for a while.
So the panic attacks, was that set on by certain sensory input or thinking that you're in the same situation?
It can be either way. So it was just like worse when I was in the situation, but also it was like my body held this remnant, this cellular memory of all the trauma. So I had to work through the parasympathetic nervous system. I had to like retrain it using like vagus nerve techniques. And just the exposure therapy. So for every single part of my day, I mean, even taking showers, I used to not be able to take a shower very easily because the water would overstimulate me. Anything could overstimulate my.
So you had a very heightened sensitivity to every sense.
Everything,
basically.
Yeah, everything, because of how much trauma I experienced.
Do you think you've improved over the years?
Oh yes, definitely. Like I said, I couldn't leave my apartment. I was basically not functioning for about 3 to 6 months.
Before I give my own advice for things like this, would you like to give some advice to anybody who suffers things that you're going through, that you went through as well?
Well, if a person is suffering from the things that I have overcome, what I would suggest is exposure therapy and the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, learning breathing exercises and just utilizing those and understanding that everyone has fight or flight. Fight or flight's a part of the amygdala. It's there to keep us safe. So when I reframed that in my mind, that this is my body just trying to take care of me, then I became more compassionate to myself and more compassionate to my body. And it was just, everything's heightened. That's the issue, it's just that it's heightened. So I would say just keep up with the exposure therapy and keep up with the breathing exercises.
So exposure therapy and change your perception of.
Yeah,
okay.
and go into compassion to yourself, and also lots of visualizations, like visualize what you want your life to be. I mean, I just took 2 flights actually to fly to the Southwest, and I had never flown before by myself, and I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, I couldn't even leave my apartment. So, I mean, that's a good example.
And like when we're driving here, there was a lot of rain. It was very hard to see. There was lightning and thunder. Are there some ways that you were fearful, and then was it the rain itself, not being able to see, or was it because, driving in a car, me driving, there's more of a possibility I could crash because of the rain and it's nighttime and it's hard to see?
Yeah, I was definitely afraid, but I think since I had done a huge exposure with the plane, both planes, I was much less afraid than I would have usually been, because usually even going on the freeway or the highway, I'll be afraid just even if it's perfect weather. But then if you put stormy weather on top of it, I would have been terrified 4 days ago. So I think those incremental exposures, plus if you go to a really extreme exposure, then the other things that usually would scare you become much less scary.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Thank you very much for sharing. I would like to give one piece of advice. Like she said, it's incremental. It's one step at a time, but it's also consistency and kind of continuance of not just pushing these problems off to the side, off to the corner, but really facing the things that you feel inhibit you, that keep you back from doing and being who you want to be. It's very vague, it's very cliche, but really it's all about the regular ritual of trying to overcome your fears, because they can definitely build up if you just don't recognize them and try to push them off to the side. And then by the time when you really want to do something in your life, those fears are there to hold you back. So address them before you're forced to address them. At any rate, thank you very much for being here, Ashley.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you have any stories that you'd like to share, feel free to shoot them down in the comment section below on YouTube. I'd love to hear it. Hit that thumbs up if you like that video, this video at all. And I'd love to see all of you on the channel in the future.